And what inspired me most about what this group is doing is that the products they build are very much inspired by technology in interesting ways. And the other thing that's interesting is in our discussion about this panel, listening to them talk about this technology they use to develop physical products sounds very much like talking to software developers about how they think about developing products. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. We're kind of running late on time after dealing with some AV issues, so I'm just going to hand off to Garett to get it going. All right?
Thank you, Rick. Hello, everybody. My name is Garett Stenson. This Portland Digital Experience Conference is fantastic, so definitely a good thing for the city, so we appreciate being here today. So as Rick mentioned, the topic that we were more or less given to speak on today was this idea of technology as inspiration for art. So after kind of mulling that over and touring the studio and kind of regrouping collectively, more or less couldn't help but flip it around as well. So how does technology inspire art? And then conversely, how does art inspire technology? So kind of just different ways to look at it, and we're not going to go down some big philosophical rabbit hole of the definition of art or technology or whatever, but essentially just we wanted to kind of share our stories individually. We've got Grove made here and MapleXO, and we'll do some more formal introductions in a second, but as Rick mentioned, we had a couple of technology issues with the display, so I'm going to actually hit the point to switch. So this slide here, this craziness, more or less, I asked all my coworkers, friends, brainstorming with the group here, like, what do you think of when you think of technology inspiring art? And there was a ton of words thrown out, everything from, oh, it makes it accessible, oh, it makes it real, oh, the idea of, building something, deploying, and really at the end of the day, we kind of just came to the conclusion that as much as there's differences between art and technology, they're very much one and the same. So you can click on the next slide, please. And my UX director, I work with Ziba Design, and I was putting this presentation together, and he actually laughed at me for using this font, so I apologize if this font offends anybody. But really, after all that kind of brainstorming, we boiled it down, and just trying to have some sort of framework for today's discussion, we put together these three buckets: the idea of design, develop, and deploy. And as that relates to the production and the distribution of art, so obviously from a design standpoint, what tensions exist, how do you break those tensions, how do you innovate, how do you come up with ideas, how do you inspire, where do those things come from? And then obviously once you enter the process of development, we'll get into discussion later about paying attention to detail and creating efficiencies during the manufacturing process and all of that. And then deploy, that can go a number of different ways. Obviously, what's your go-to-market strategy? How do you share it, et cetera. So next slide, if you could. So here's a couple, we'll come back to this slide at the very end, but more or less, if you want to tweet or Instagram or whatever, there's our kind of our handles for everybody on the panel. But you can go ahead and switch to the next slide if you would, please. So we'll do some introductions to start, and then we'll dive into some questions with the panel here, and then at the end we'll save some time for questions from the audience. So a couple weeks ago, went out and toured Grove's facility in Southeast, and I was definitely fascinated, almost brought a tear to my eye. I come from a background in making products as well, and so it's really fascinating to see their operation. So this is kind of an example of one of the machines they're running. If you go to the next slide. I thought, given today's topic of discussion around technology, I thought this slide was kind of funny, actually, with this. Ken, make sure you see this device. You won't be able to talk about this one here. But more or less, this is one of the machines that runs, essentially, the CAM machine. Is that right? CNC machine, okay. And the next slide. And this is upstairs. So Grove has grown into a company where they're doing, they're manufacturing different accessories, iPhone cases, iPad cases, notebook covers, and I was really impressed with their attention to detail. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Ken and Joe to kind of introduce themselves individually.
Hi, my name is Joe Mansfield, and this is my business partner, Ken Tomita. We're really excited to be here. We both started out of our houses or businesses about 5 years ago, and we've had a pretty wild path of growth to where we're at today. It all started with the idea of bringing art to technology, and my original business idea back in 2007 was to engrave artwork onto laptops, and the original iPhone, if you guys remember that, it had an aluminum back, and artwork looked amazing on it. But there was a big logistical problem to it. Not many people wanted to ship their $3,000 laptop across the country to my bedroom. It was not the most credible business at the time. So I happened to meet my neighbor who lived right across the street from me, and he was making custom commissioned furniture at the time.
Yeah, so I was a one-man business designing and fabricating furniture, mostly in bamboo, and also doing some sculpture. And Joe and I became friends just from coincidence, just from proximity. And instead of working like we were supposed to be, since we were freelance, we'd often end up throwing a football around in the street, talking about ideas for hours.
Yeah, our friendship really hurt our productivity. And so it came to a point where we were just like, we should probably just work together on something since we're hurting our individual businesses.
But the next slide actually have an example of one of your products here. So it's definitely a nice blend of the engraving background and the furniture design background here. So
yeah, so you guys may have seen products similar to this. The market's become extremely saturated, but we had this idea back in 2007 to create a canvas for art for iPhones because of the logistic reasons I mentioned of people, not being willing to send their actual iPhone across country to have it engraved with art. And so that's kind of where it started. And just we were really inspired by the forms of the iPhone originally. Like the iPhone 3 had really graceful compound curves, and we thought an organic material would work really nicely with that instead of the chintzy plastic that they used on the back.
all right, next slide. We'll go ahead and introduce Lindsay as well. Lindsay's with MapleXO. This is a nice shot of her in her workshop, so I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I own MapleXO. We make jewelry and accessories out of recycled skateboards, and now we're making it out of the scraps of skateboard manufacturing as well. I separately met Joe and Ken when I first started my business in 2005-ish, 2006-ish. Ken was a member of a wood shop where I learned how to use power tools, and so I got to see him start his furniture business there, I guess. And then Joe was taking laser engraving work and stuff, I don't know how to say
Yeah.
Yeah, so he did some custom laser work for me back in the day. So naturally, so this is some of the pieces we make. We basically just use the skateboards as much as we can without adding anything to it. So we take away the grip tape and we just sand. We don't add the colors. That's all inside the boards already. And after my business grew enough, we're in our 5th year right now. About 2 years ago, me and Joe and Ken all ran into each other and were like, let's try and work together. So we created a product together making a recycled skateboard iPhone case. And it was a huge success. It had a lot of attention. We actually pre-launched it in November, was it?
Yeah, we did a limited edition run of 50 individually engraved ones, and they sold out instantly. We put 10 on eBay with half the proceeds going to charity, and they were going for $400, $800, that kind of range. So it was very successful. People were excited about it, yeah. But it was very technically challenging, so we limited it to that for a few years until we recently did a skate back, which is a little bit more simple.
Well, actually, pass around, Kim, if you could. We're going to go ahead and, as we have this conversation today, we thought it'd be helpful, given that this is definitely more of a digital conference, but there's obviously this beauty to holding something in your hand as well. So Kim works at GroveMade, community manager at GroveMade. Pass around some product samples from MapleXO, Grove, and then at the next slide. And partly why I was asked to be here and kind of moderate the discussion is certain circles I'm known as the duct tape wallet guy. So if anybody's heard of a duct tape wallet, or I hope some of you have. But yeah, I started a business right out of high school making duct tape wallets, made about 30,000 duct tape wallets by hand, and then go to the next slide, I eventually went out and set up full-scale manufacturing, started attending trade shows, traveling around the world, doing different things, and really kind of upped the game and transitioned from a duct tape wallet company to a more formalized kind of premium product. The brand was called DB Clay. Let's go to the next slide. So now, years later, I'm at Ziba Design. So Ziba is a design and innovation consultancy just right over the bridge here in Portland. And so my role at Ziba is a design and innovation consultant, essentially. I do a lot of business development. And so part of today's discussion and why I'm excited to be here is this kind of contrast from starting a business from scratch, as I think all of us have done, and then contrasting that with things that go on at Ziba in terms of working with Fortune 100 companies and big global brands. So there's a lot of contrast, but there's also a lot of similarities. So the next slide, I think we'll kind of just set things up here. We'll just keep this up. Feel free to, here's our handles. So with that said, we'll just kind of maybe jump into some questions, have a little dialogue, and then we'll open it up to the audience here. So, yeah, again, I sat down with the three of these folks here and just kind of talked about, what do we want to talk about today? And there was a lot of patterns that rose to the surface. And so without giving away too much confidential information, I think one question that was instant for me in terms of, essentially the intersection between technology and art is this idea of, with technology, it's these constant, rapid product releases. And so, for example, with making an iPhone case, I'm curious to know when it comes time to keeping up with big brands like Apple that are putting out new phones. How do you design your products? How do you keep up? How do you be flexible? How do you be nimble? How do you scale?
Well, it's a common misconception that case manufacturers get the specs. I think ever since Apple started making their own cases, they've been much more tight-lipped about the specs with case manufacturers. So definitely a smaller company like us, no. And I suspect even larger ones too. If you remember with the iPhone 4 when it came out, there were no cases for a long time because nobody knew what it was going to look like. And it takes a long time to tool plastic injection molding. It takes a long time to fly to factories in China, etc. And I think a big reason of our success early was because we were fast, because we do our manufacturing and design in-house. So basically what we do is we look at the rumors, just like everybody else does. We don't have anything special besides an internet connection. And we try to anticipate best we can what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and Joe, you'd mentioned in our conversation as well on that note of being fast and nimble. You were talking about kind of the advantages of being a small business versus a big business in terms of being fast, flexible, integrated. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, definitely. So Ken and I we have 23 employees, and we're really open to suggestions and advice, but at the end of the day, it's just the two of us making the final decision. So we make decisions really quickly, probably too quickly sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so leaks are definitely our friend. And I don't know if you guys remember the original iPhone 4 and the Apple engineer that got too drunk and left it in a bar for Gizmodo to pick up on. But that kind of information is really helpful for us.
I think another interesting thing about essentially how Grove operates is, in contrasting that with the software community, is I think their growth has been all organic, selling physical products, and it's been very incremental. And now you're up to 23 employees. So I think Ken, I think you had a lot of opinions on the matter in terms of the way that you're managing the growth of your business and kind of your end goal.
Yeah, so when Joe and I started this company, we didn't have aspirations for global domination or anything like that. We just believed in this one product, wanted to make it as good as we can. And whether it was planned or not, we ended up not taking any funding, no investors. We just grew with our own cash flows. And I think there's definitely some pitfalls to that, but there's also some huge advantages.
And what we saw in the image, probably a lot of investment in machinery.
Yeah, and capital equipment. Mostly it's really about your goals. Certain industries you have to get big quick. I think like Airbnb, for example, that's a slide that popped up. A company like that, you have to get huge quickly. But we were going for a niche of the highest quality, and so we focused on getting our product right, and to get it right, we did it ourselves. the other advantage of doing it ourselves is we don't have, we have shorter lead times, but also we don't have $200,000 purchase orders to a huge order from China, from a factory or something like that, that could potentially take us down. Or we might run out of capital and need help. So by doing it a little bit at a time, it really allows us to do something that we wouldn't be able to do without a lot of capital.
Yeah, and that's a big benefit to manufacturing everything ourselves in Portland. We've seen a lot of friends in the industry, get a product on Kickstarter, and when they're successful, they're like, oh crap, what do I do? And they just go to China immediately. That's their gut reaction. And then they're forced into taking VC money just to pay the factory in China because the order minimums are so large. And so, and also there's big time quality issues that come from factories in China. And so by being so directly involved in our day-to-day production, like we have a lot of advantages in being more nimble and being able to catch mistakes.
We basically innovate on the fly. It's an unorthodox method of product design where we're designing and making at the same time. We're running the machines. We've taken off the machine. Oh, we should tweak this, and we're just off and running.
Ken's computer workstation, his entire chair is covered in sawdust. Pretty fun to check it out. It actually really makes things. So as much as there's similarities amongst the panel, I think one thing that kind of surfaced in our last conversation that I thought was particularly interesting was Lindsay's business is primarily selling through wholesale channels. So I think you have about 45 retailers around, and so as far as current state, Lindsay's selling her products primarily through wholesale channels. And she's looking to get more involved in e-commerce. And then conversely, Grove is primarily e-commerce, and they're looking to potentially get into retail. So maybe, Lindsay, you can talk a little bit about some of the hurdles you're going through, some of the struggles in terms of making that leap from wholesale to e-com.
Sure. So with wholesale, we deal a lot with one person and one order, and we spend a lot of time making it, and we ship it, and then that one store that placed the order will sell our individual pieces. So a lot of what we focus on is how to connect with shop owners and how to create our products so they can sit on shelves in stores. And when we're trying to think about selling it online, it's a lot different because it might not ship as cleanly as it would when you're shipping an entire box of this jewelry, and we have our different ways of doing it. One thing that Grove does is they create this incredible experience when someone opens their package in the mail. You have all this different literature that they can read, and the way that it's presented in the box it's like this moment, So I'm trying to learn about that stuff from those guys, and we just don't have a website built up for it yet, so I'm learning a lot from how they are doing their website and their sales online. Because most of what we do is, and people are still faxing us orders. It's definitely like a lot more, on the phone, people-to-people contact. So.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting, beauty to being able to control that entire, like Lindsay's point about shipping that product out to the consumer. I can see this a lot on Etsy and different platforms where you're able to control that entire out-of-box experience. So putting a smile on somebody's face when they get your package in the mail and they open it up, and all the collateral and the storytelling that goes with that. So to kind of piggyback on that conversation, and definitely interesting kind of hearing about some of the go-to-retail strategy for you guys. But one gap we identified in our conversation as well from a software perspective is there's this notion that you're a small business or you're a big business, and there's this whole middle area where you're a mid-sized business. And so, from a small business perspective, it's oftentimes, let's just go with an off-the-shelf, software solution. Let's go with QuickBooks, or let's use Shopify to power our shopping cart. Or when you get big and you're looking at big enterprise applications, right? And so Grove's found itself in this kind of middle area where they're not small anymore, but they're not huge. And so they've actually made a decision to, Ken's brother, I believe, essentially custom build their own e-commerce platform on the back end, and that allows for, all that can speak to it, but allows for, there's challenges, I'm sure, but there's also a lot of flexibility that it can afford. So maybe.
Yeah, when we first started, we started with Shopify, which is a great platform for mom and pop shops. There's several shopping cart softwares out there right now, but immediately we started running into limitations. And fortunately, my little brother, who's in the audience right there, Yuji, we're very lucky to have him because without his technical expertise, we would have been in a lot of trouble. So basically, a lot of times we explore these templated software solutions, but there's always something it can't do or something specific to our business, and it's an ongoing debate. But we often end up having my brother custom build something that works perfectly for us.
And what are the challenges associated with that?
Well, I mean, the challenges are, so we have several disparate systems that we're trying to integrate into one that basically works together through a custom backend. So just trying to figure out like the QuickBook API and just different ways to get those programs to speak to each other has been really difficult.
And it gets to be kind of a mess, you know. When we started out with just me and Joe, and the systems that worked back then. We slowly added people, and it was fine for a while, using these templated solutions. And we had Shopify, we have QuickBooks, we have our backend, we have manual spreadsheets keeping track of stuff. And next thing you know, we have 23 people, and it's a mess. So right now we're at a crossroads where we're going back in, cleaning up all these legacy old systems that just don't really work for us anymore at our scale.
It's a good problem to have. You guys are growing. Interestingly enough, as well, on the software side, you know, going and touring the facility, seeing this big CNC machine operating. This, I don't know what the machine, Haas is the name of the machine. Yeah. Big, huge machine, this big interface with all these buttons. And so maybe you can speak a little bit to the antiquated nature of some of the tools that are currently available, right. And how do you see that changing or adapting to, you know, as you guys are growing and being flexible and offering customized products and things. Can you describe a little bit that gap between the tools that exist from a hardware perspective versus what your needs are?
Well, I can talk about the antiquated systems. So CNC machines, they run on G-code, which is essentially just text. And we have a software called Mastercam, which converts a 3D file, 3D drawing into toolpaths. So you can program which tools are used by the machine to cut things and how fast the cutter is spinning, etc. But the interface is not very user-friendly, to put it lightly. I don't think it's been worked on since 60s, probably.
Yeah, it comes with 1 megabyte of RAM.
And if you pay $1,000, you get 10 megabytes. I mean, it's insane. It's like 30 years behind. And I think it's just one of those industries where it's not a consumer product, so it's used by professionals, so there's not really a push to make it user-friendly. So it's definitely really challenging to learn.
Yeah, I work with a lot of enterprise, large enterprises at Ziba, and it's interesting from enterprise perspective. You know, as consumers, we're now used to the touch interface, you know, the iPhone interface. But then when you go to work, you know, when you work in a big factory, you work wherever, and you're using these antiquated tools. So there's definitely a big gap that needs to be filled there in terms of modernizing these enterprise tools to reflect what people are used to from their day-to-day lives, right?
Yeah, like that control panel, it looks like the space shuttle or something. You know, there's all these buttons. It's actually, in some ways, sometimes it's more simple. Sometimes I'll go into the code and manually you delete something and type it in. Whereas the software, it's hard to describe, but the lasers are a little more sophisticated.
Yeah, so the two primary technological machines we use are laser cutters / engravers and CNC mills. And we rely on both types of machines heavily. The mills are used for shaping the raw bamboo forms, and the lasers we use to cut parts and also to engrave the artwork on all our products. And it's amazing to see how far laser technology and interfaces have come in the last probably 5 or 6 years. It's like basically using a printer at this point. you just can print directly out of Illustrator or any of your favorite programs. So, but learning the CNCs was the biggest challenge we faced. When Ken and I first started, it took us about 9 months to figure out how to program the mill, and we were really lucky to have one of Portland's best CNC consultants helping us out.
Very niche.
Yeah, his name is Chris Rizzo. But yeah, so after 9 months of just bashing our head against this like control panel that didn't make any sense, we were able to get our first product out, and it was the iPhone 3 case. And it was just impossibly hard to make. We had to sand every compound curve of that thing by hand and file all those cutouts by hand and oil them. It just took a ridiculous amount of time to make. And luckily, right as we launched that product, the iPhone 4 leaked. And so no one actually bought our product after 9 months of intense work. So.
But it was a blessing in disguise. It's kind of a funny story now. It was literally the same day we launched the Apple guy got drunk and left it in a bar. So
there's this another thing that surfaced in our conversation. This interesting kind of, you typically see a technologist and an industrial designer as two separate things, and so I think Ken maybe mentioned this in terms of, you know, it's an interesting skill set to be able to understand the software side of things, the user experience, the design, the digital aspect, but being able to translate that into a physical product, and it's oftentimes something gets lost in terms of the type of person who can program the machine isn't necessarily the type of person that understands form factor and ergonomics and things that are in more physical form. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so programming these machines requires technical programming skill, but it also requires knowledge of actually making stuff physically. It's an unusual combination, and I find my guys that do it, they really enjoy it because of that unusual combination. And our company is so small that there's not much separation between design and programming and the actual physical fabrication. It's all right there, and oftentimes it's, like you said, it's the same person. So the way I think about it, it's kind of like my old business where I started making my own furniture because I thought something got lost in the translation from designer to fabricator. So why not combine it, right? And it's just kind of scaled up to a medium size now.
So as far as, you know, using technology to market your products and to, you know, to distribute your products and tell stories around your products, I think one thing Lindsay had mentioned it's been really effective for her is using Instagram. And I think you mentioned something to the effect that Instagram's huge in the skateboard world. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your strategy around leveraging tools like Instagram to promote your products.
Sure, yeah. So in the skateboard world, a lot of what that type of culture really craves is being able to know exactly what's happening and where the pro skateboarders are and what tricks they're doing and who's landed what and who landed something better at the same location. And if there's an opportunity for them to be a part of a skateboard contest or a launch or something that's happening in that world. And with Instagram, companies are constantly touring, skateboard companies are constantly touring and traveling, and them posting a photo, and the people that are following them on Instagram being able to realize that, oh, they're in my hometown and I can like see them right now. It just creates this tangible aspect from the consumer and the company that they're buying the things from. So there's another thing that the skateboard companies are doing where they are basically posting photos of their newest products on Instagram and saying, okay, we'll sell these at your skate shops if it has the most likes. So they're just like letting the consumers decide what they're gonna sell. They even have things set up on their websites to where people can vote on what they're gonna create for the next season. So there's a huge bridge that's been gapped with Instagram and Facebook and Twitter in the skateboard industry for sure, between the consumer and the companies.
And how do you guys use different tools and platforms? And then you have 28,000 likes on Facebook, and you have some big news around Instagram. Maybe kind of talk a little bit about how you use technology to
promote and sell your products?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we to some degree use it as a way to validate new ideas or possible products from feedback from our fans, and it's pretty amazing to have this broad audience that can give you instant feedback. I mean, that's invaluable to us, and so and we really value the direct relationship we have with our customers. We're constantly analyzing their feedback and prioritizing what our next step should look like based on their feedback. And so, yeah, Instagram's been really enormous for us. Especially recently, we just got featured as a suggested user, and so we've seen our Instagram followers basically quadruple overnight to around 5,000 followers. So we're pretty stoked about that.
Yeah, I think in talking with Kim, who's the community manager at Grove, interesting in terms of, as brands get larger, you become more and more maybe disconnected from your consumer. So that importance of maintaining that dialogue with your consumer. Grove, I think, is very transparent, just from my perspective. And Kim had mentioned that there was this idea of if a customer mentions something more than once, if more than one customer mentions something, they jot it down. And so they use interesting terms of, maybe you could speak to a little bit about how you listen to your customers, how you get those insights, and how you translate those to either improvements in product, et cetera.
So especially on a product launch, since there's so much pressure to get our products out early, same with any other company that's attached to Apple, we don't have time to do focus groups and test the product for 6 months before we launch it. So we have to launch it, and then immediately we're listening, and then when we get feedback, we can fix things, we can tweak things immediately. And that's a huge edge by doing things in-house and having this great network on particular Facebook.
Yeah, and the fans see that we're taking action on their suggestions, and they just feel really empowered by that, and because we hear them, and that's pretty unusual.
I think you guys are also very, you're at the very nice stage, which is a good thing in terms of making sure your customers feel special. And I think one story that was funny was, customizing a case for somebody, and I think they told me a story of somebody, sometimes they get a fully vectorized, beautifully done piece of artwork, but sometimes they have people, one customer emailed them a picture of their tattoo and said, hey, can you engrave this for me on a case or something? And they're like,
I was literally like this, they peeled up this.
So from my perspective, they go the extra mile and they actually help that person out. And I think in turn, obviously that's added, labor and that's extra work. But in turn, I think you turn your customers into evangelists for your brand.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that we do that's it's kind of backwards technology. We do it all manually through email. Instead of having a fancy interface on our site where you can upload your artwork and see what it looks like, you actually email us, and one of our designers talks to the customer directly back and forth, and gets the file perfectly in a way that a machine never could. So it's kind of an inefficient way of doing it, but that personal contact, we'll probably try to keep that. I think it's really great for our brand, and our customers definitely love that kind of interaction, which is rare these days.
Definitely attention to detail. So I think at this point, we'd like to maybe open up the panel to questions from the audience. If anybody has a burning question or wants to know more about product design, development. Any questions out there? No questions?
Sure. Do you have trouble finding people with the skill sets you need here in Portland?
We do a lot of training in-house. Partly it's my background. I'm totally self-taught. My brother's totally self-taught. We kind of have the extreme DIY Portland spirit. So oftentimes people come to our company and start out as a production assistant, and then when we need a special skill like a CNC programmer, we ask if anyone wants to do it, and they put in the time to figure it out. That's kind of our spirit. Yeah. So I guess the answer is we tend to do it in-house and just try to figure it out. Yeah.
And we've had a really easy time finding people who are really creative and passionate and really into making things. So we take this just raw energy, and we kind of help give them direction and help them grow. So it hasn't been too hard to find good talent in Portland. So.
I think the beauty of running a startup too is, you look at it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think this idea of you wear a million hats, right? Rather than working for a big company where you have a very specialized idea to just do this one thing, I think in a startup world, it makes sense to have somebody who can do a little bit of everything, including take out the trash, right? Yeah. Question?
Yeah. If you were going to do DB Clay over again today, using the technologies that we have now, what would you have done differently if you could start it again, like right now?
Good question.
Case started, man. Come on.
I think about DB Clay a lot. Very early on in DB Clay, we were a wallet company, and I saw this trend happening probably as early as like 2006, 7-ish, where this idea that your smartphone is going to essentially replace the idea of a wallet. And it wasn't going to happen necessarily overnight, but kind of this transition from a physical object you put in your pocket to everything converging to your smartphone device. So I think the first fundamental change, if DB Clay was to resurface, would I'd probably focus more on the digital wallet aspect as opposed to the physical. I think there's a certain beauty to analog in terms of having something physical. I've actually done a lot of research on the history of wallets, and wallets used to be essentially just an article, how do I say this? Essentially just held your articles. So sometimes you'd have your fishing bait in there, you'd have your tobacco in there, and that was kind of the origins of the wallet. And then as essentially currency evolved from metal, precious metals, to paper, to credit cards being invented in the 50s, and now we're kind of in this digital era. I think, to answer your question, I think I probably have my first foot forward would probably be more in the digital wallet space. But certainly leveraging the tools. We were pre Facebook, pre-Instagram, pre all these tools. We made the decision of going out and building our own backend as well, because there wasn't things like Shopify yet. And so I certainly would leverage off-the-shelf tools more effectively. And I also would probably hire somebody to run the business so I could focus more on the creative aspect. Question?
Sounds like you need to put an NFC chip in a wallet. Maybe that's your next thing with a digital wallet. Anyway, my question was for Grove, why Apple only, and now that, or Apple products, and now that the Samsung Galaxy S3 sells more than the iPhone, would you consider doing something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So originally our idea to focus on Apple only originated because they have one single form factor for their phone instead of the multitude of Android devices out there. And so it takes a ton of development time for us to get the form factor perfect. And really, up until now, we haven't been able to make enough product to satisfy our demand on just iPhones. And so we're trying to focus on our core business first.
I think you mentioned something when we were chatting about you resisting that urge to expand your product portfolio. Like, you want to do everything, but I think there's a certain, keeping a focus on one product and perfecting as opposed to fragmenting your efforts, perhaps.
Right, it's a constant struggle. It's the big drawback of doing everything yourself. We don't outsource, so we're not infinitely scalable, and if we have new product lines, we deal with the complexity, not our supplier. So every day we're fighting, beating down the cool things we want to do, and trying to grow responsibly, where we don't lose our core vision.
Yeah, I mean, we have several products that have never seen the light of day. They may be, I feel like they're some of the best products out there, but they probably won't ever be released just because we need to focus on our core, and we have limited resources.
We have time for one more question, Rick?
Yeah. Okay, this is a question for everybody, but perhaps starting with Maple. So what is it like when you're doing a product that has its foundation in upcycled or recycled materials? Do you have any advice for people who are thinking about working in that space for how to acquire that raw material?
Yeah, well, when you said raw material, sorry, I guess the thing that I've learned a lot about being in the recycled industry is that people like that label, and they like things that are, eco-friendly these days. a huge selling point, but people don't want to feel like they are buying junk. They don't want to feel like they're buying something that's like from trash, really. So my best advice for people that are trying to use recycled material is to take it and change the context of it completely. We try to not leave, we take as much away as we can from a skateboard to turn it into a different product. And my favorite thing is when people are like, oh, I love your jewelry. Oh, I had no idea it was made from skateboards. I'm like, that's great. So I think, and along with that is the packaging. It's the way that you present it on your website. So much about it has to do with the final product. So focusing on the entire package of it, I think is a good way to embrace recycling and not make it like a negative thing, but it's a positive thing.
Yeah, the product needs to be able to stand on its own and not just be a gimmick. You need to use the materials appropriately. Like I think another great example of upcycling is AG. It's a Seattle-based company, and they turn old bicycle tubes into messenger bags and all kinds of products. And the material is perfect for that because it's incredibly durable, it's waterproof, it has a really fresh look. And so that's just one example of using materials appropriately if you're going to upcycle them. I think the MapleXO Grove collaboration is a good example. So our new collaboration uses post-industrial waste. So we're actually going into this giant dumpster at a skateboard factory and using scraps that are too small to use to make skateboard decks. And the material is really ideal for our product because it's hard rock maple. It's really durable. It's made to be thrashed on, and so it's a great material for a case.
Well, we certainly appreciate everybody's time. Hopefully nobody walked out the door with our product samples, but yeah, so we'll be in the back if anybody has any questions, and definitely check these folks out online. So thanks for your time.